Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts broadcast. And today we'll be talking with Linda Roggli about the connection between shame and ADHD in adults with attention deficit disorder. Shame and ADHD are persistent, if uncomfortable, partners. Adults with undiagnosed ADHD may spend their entire lives believing that they're fundamentally flawed. Shame impairs our self-esteem, and it makes it hard to make good life choices about relationships, about employment, and so many other things. So Linda is going to be talking about the many sources of shame for adults with ADHD, and most importantly, how to take those first steps toward forgiving yourself and others, and for being exactly who you are. So I want to thank Linda today for being here today and introduce her to you. She is a professional certified coach, PCC, and she's an award-winning author. Her book, The Confessions of an ADD Diva, Midlife in the Nonlinear Lane, won first prize for women's issues in the very prestigious Next Generation Indie Book Awards. She's the founder of the ADD Diva Network for ADHD women 50 and better, and the ADHD Lollapalooza, which you may know about. She is a very popular speaker online. If you ever have the chance to hear her at a conference, don't hesitate to step right up and listen to her, because she's an inspirational speaker, as you'll hear today. She's a former vice president of the Attention Deficit Disorder Association, ADhd, and she currently chairs its webinar committee. So thank you, Linda, so much. We're so happy to have you and so grateful to you for spending the time to talk to us today.
Thrilled to be here.
As always, with Attitude's broadcast, Linda's going to present her slides, and then she'll take as many questions as time permits. Before she starts, I just want to ask you to share with our listeners something about yourself, specifically what brought you here today. What's your primary interest in this topic? Is it learning to change your own negative self-talk? Is it trying to figure out how to take responsibility without blaming yourself? Is it learning to forgive yourself or the others around you, or is it something else? So take the poll, and we'll share the results with everyone as soon as we give everyone a chance to take it. And while you're doing that, let me remind you that you can download Linda Roggli's slides right now in the resource widget. Some people like to print them out while they're listening. You can also resize the widgets on your screen if you make the screen as compatible for you as you'd like. And don't forget that webinars are very bandwidth intensive, and we'd like you to close any browser sessions you may have open or running in the background, just to make sure that you can hear everything that's said. So let's see. All of the above. That's unfortunate for all of us. Okay. All right, Linda, we look forward to your talk. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate it. All righty. Let's talk a little bit about shame. I love this little picture that has the seeds of ADHD shame, because clearly there are lots of seeds of shame for ADHD. And let's face it, shame is not just about us. Shame is, everybody has probably a degree of shame, but I think it's intensified with ADHD. It creeps in when we do something that we think is wrong, or especially when someone else notices that we did something wrong, and suddenly we're cringing and we're crouching and we're trying to hide. But it's not just being embarrassed. It's that sinking, kind of sickening feeling that, oh my gosh, I've stepped into it again. And I mean, I know this is kind of hard to admit, but I actually used to crawl under my desk. I was in such shame that I would just crawl under my desk. It was just like, I want to keep the rest of the world out. It was kind of like, I want to crawl into a hole and die. And I have to tell you that shame can devolve into serious depression. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about, but sometimes shame can even push some people into suicide, and they actually do kill themselves. So we're not going to talk about those kinds of things, because I don't want to emphasize that, but it's very, very serious. Shame is nothing to be taken lightly. And so I want you to take it seriously for yourself, and to know that there are ways to get out of that hole. But I'm going to read you something that I found on the Attitude site. I'm not going to tell you who wrote this, and I'm not even sure who wrote it, but it just makes me sad to read and to see if you might identify with some of it. A lifetime of mischances, bad first impressions, poor social skills, being too loud, too annoying, too honest, and just too much has left me with broken hope. Oh, I'm going to be upset all the before. I usually cry at webinars. I just want to let you know. Left me with broken hope, broken dreams, and a broken heart. I've learned that I'm defective, a bad person. So today I want to talk about how shame starts for us, all the many ways that we are shamed as ADHD folks. And then we'll talk about the end of the thing, which is like hope, because there is hope. And getting past shame is a skill that you can learn. And I'm going to tell you how to do that at the end of our webinar today. So let's talk about what are those seeds of shame? Well, first of all, oh my gosh, you have ADHD, right? That's shameful enough, right? There's something wrong with your brain. It's a little different than having something wrong with your arm, like, you know, you have or more one leg shorter than another, or having an ulcer. Having something wrong with your brain makes people very suspicious, like you're going to turn into an axe murderer or something like that. And believe me, it's kind of that stigma of having something wrong with your brain. And it doesn't apply to just ADHD. It applies to all mental conditions and mental illnesses and mental disorders. It kind of covers the bandwidth, if you will. But there's something about ADHD that is particularly difficult for people. And that can certainly send us into part of that, what I call the shame spiral. Because let's face it, a lot of times our family and friends don't believe in ADHD. And that's really hard to counteract when you're standing there saying, okay, well, here's this study right here, and here's these genes that cause ADHD, and it's a neurophysiological blah, blah, blah. And they go, yeah, it's just an excuse. They kind of ridicule it, and it's very dismissive, and it's incredibly difficult to maintain our self-esteem in the face of, you're just using it as an excuse. But the truth is that sometimes we don't believe in ADHD either. This person said, there's a narrative running through my brain saying, it's not really ADHD. I really am just lazy. If I just tried harder, everything would be fine. I just need to work harder, work more, use more timers, put more reminders on my phone. If we just could do a little bit more, we could beat this thing called ADHD or pretend that it doesn't even exist. And for me, that actually came out very, very strongly because the first time I was diagnosed with ADHD, someone just talked to me and said, and I talked blah, 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 blah. And he would ask me a little question and I'd go blah, 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 blah. At the end of 45 minutes, I was 15 minutes late, of course. After the end of 45 minutes, I said, I don't have ADHD, do I? And he said, oh, yes. You definitely have ADHD. And I thought, oh, no, this guy just talked to me. And what if I do have it? So what? So it took me 3 tries, 3 different physicians, 3 different diagnoses. The last one with Dr. Hallowell's clinic, because I thought, well, he's the real expert, so he knows. And when they said, yes, you have it, I finally believed it. But there are still times in my life when I say, can't you just get it together? So sometimes that pushes me into shame as well, and it may do that for you as well. The other thing is about treatment with ADHD. A lot of times, if we do take medication, we are shamed for taking medication. Oh, you're going to turn into a drug addict. You can't take, that's amphetamines. Oh my God, you can buy that on the street. You really are, you just can't do that. On the other hand, we also get shamed if we don't take medication or we don't seek treatment, because what do you mean? You said you had ADHD. Why aren't you taking? Why aren't you doing something about it? Just take this little magic pill and it'll be all better. And then, of course, if you've taken medication and it works for you, congratulations. If you've taken medication and it has worked fairly well, but not completely as much as you'd like it to, you understand that. So there's a piece of us that says, okay, well, I'm taking it or I'm not taking it, but it's kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't kind of thing. And that can cause, what I'm talking about here is kind of a layer of shame, so that it may not be one of these things that I'm talking about today individually, but it may be the combination of all these things that pile up on top of us, and it pushes us into deep, deep shame, the kind I was talking about crawling under the desk and just wanting to escape the world. Let's face it, there are a lot of reasons that we fall into shame. We often don't do well at work, and there are a lot of reasons that we don't do well at work. One of them is that we perhaps way back in the early days didn't do so well in school. We might not have gone to college, or we might not have gone to a trade school or vocational school, or if we did, we didn't make it through. The percentage of us who graduate from the higher education, if you will, is exceedingly small. So if you've done that, congratulations, you've done an amazing job. And some of people I know have graduate degrees, which is an even smaller percentage percentage of ADHD folks. And yet even those folks feel that they're underachieving at work. And sometimes even when we get a promotion at work, I mean, obviously this poor woman is being fired and she's been asked to leave for whatever reason. But even when we get promotions at work, sometimes we stumble and fall. We may be doing really well at the job that we're doing, and then we do so well, we get promoted, then we're not doing that job anymore. We're actually managing other people doing the job that we were really good at. So that's another source of shame, and something that is very, very difficult. A career, which also means money. Another person talked about the heartbreak of unrealized potential, that we're never quite living up to what we believe we could live up to. I've constantly underachieved. I earn a mere pittance. I just haven't made my mark in the world. I always thought I'd do something great, but I just never could make it work. And I know a lot of us, even me, I feel that way many, many times, that I just, I thought I was going to be the mayor of some town or being on Oprah or whenever Oprah was still on. And I didn't do those things that I had dreams about. And in some cases, we settle for far less than we're worth, which also pushes us into shame. Let's face it, we kind of lag behind our peers. We're looking out there, kind of staying on the work issue. We're kind of looking out there saying, well, look at that person. They're doing really well. And they're buying a new house, and they're all that kind of, they're moved into a different apartment. Or even more so when you get older, and in my case, a lot of my friends and neighbors, they retired. My best friend retired like 5 or 6 years ago. She's having a wonderful time doing volunteer work and all that kind of stuff. I feel like I'm going to have to keep working until the day that I die, because have I saved enough for retirement? Probably not. And what is retirement for ADHD folks anyway? Kathleen Nadeau is doing a study about retirement and ADHD folks. And so if you're in that age group, that's kind of a scary thought. What happens when I get older? And that can also be a source of shame for us. Let's face it, when we're talking about money, whether we save it or whether we spend it, a lot of times we spend it, even if we don't have it. A friend of mine in Tennessee charged up charge cards so much that she ended up with $30,000 in charge card bills, and she couldn't pay them. She wasn't, back to the other slide, she was making just a pittance. She wasn't able to pay them herself, and worse, she was hiding those bills from her husband. She was intercepting that bill so that he wouldn't see it, and then she would be able to, I'll tell him when I get this paid off, or I'll tell him when I stop spending, or I'll tell him when things are better. And they never did get better. So she finally had to, red-faced and ashamed, back to ashamed, had to hand him the bill, and they had to have a very, very difficult conversation. I mean, let's face it, some of the things that make us overspend are impulsivity. And the internet makes it so much easier to do that. It's there 24/7. We don't have to wait until the store opens. The store is always open. So then we get the bills, and suddenly we're trying to balance. And sometimes it's a choice between paying that credit card bill or paying the rent or buying food, et cetera, et cetera. Especially difficult when you have children in your family. So let's face it, we tend to screw up. What do we screw up? We have car accidents, for heaven's sake. It's not just spilling coffee all over everything. I mean, anybody can do any of these things. ADHD, again, it's about this pile up of things happening one after another after another. We lose clients at work because we don't follow through. That certainly happened to me. I lost one of the biggest clients in my company when I was doing radio sales, and it was somebody that had been with them forever. And he said, I don't want to work with that woman anymore. She doesn't pay enough attention to me. Isn't that an interesting comment? And that was long before I was diagnosed with ADHD. We think we're bad parents. We think we're doing a bad job with parenting. We feel guilty about that, and we feel shame about that. We let people down, even our best friends. Let me read you what one woman wrote. I really hate myself when I've fallen into this dark hole of depression, and eventually it gets so bad that I feel like I deserve to feel this way. I tend to look back over my life and think about all the not so nice things that have come out of my mouth without thinking, and all the mistakes I've made, and feel that maybe this is my punishment. This is my punishment. So when we get to that point, let's face it, you can't just continue to take on shame and shame and shame without feeling like you need to escape it. And one of the ways that we escape it is by lying about things. We lie. We lie about situations that are too difficult to face, as this quotation says. I lie about mistakes, and then people don't trust me. I always feel like I'm a bad person for my ADD failures and my inability to be truthful about them. So we lie, and then we hate ourselves for it, back to that shame spiral again. We're ashamed of our emotions. Let's face it, a lot of folks with ADHD, this has become a very popular subject lately, is our emotionality. We go from one extreme to another. ADHD can be about extremes, and it can be about being really excited about something and interested and, oh, I'm all over it, and then suddenly being, not really that excited about it anymore. It's about being happy and then sad. It's about being furious and then not so furious. So that roller coaster of emotions can be very difficult for people out there, and therefore their reaction to that is what's going on in here. Back to that shame again. And notice that a lot of the things I'm talking about are about what other people think of us, not just what we think of ourselves, but we take that on, we internalize it, and then become shamed about who we are. It's not just about what we're doing. Suddenly it's about, I'm just not a good person. And whether we recognize it as an ADHD trait or not, ADHD contributes to it greatly. Let's face it, we're embarrassed when we talk too much. And some people can be, and you can see the expression on these people's faces, it's like, oh no, you get the look, I call it. And sometimes we even know the look, we can even see it, and we just can't stop ourselves. We just continue to talk and talk and talk, knowing that we're alienating people, knowing that we're talking about things that are not interesting to them, and yet we just can't stop ourselves. And then afterwards, we replay that again and again and again in our minds, like, oh, I did that again. I can't believe I will never do that again. And then sometimes we do, because we just don't know how to stop ourselves. Or on the other side, we're embarrassed and shamed when we don't say anything. This woman's falling asleep, apparently in an important meeting, but also when you're just in conversation with someone and they're talking, and all of a sudden everyone looks at you and says, and as if to say, and what do you think? And you're just totally have no idea what they're even talking about. You've been in your own little world, probably because you got bored by what they were talking about, to tell you the truth. And then you fall into shame again. And again, back to that replaying things again and again, beating yourself up even after the fact, which is also a place of shame. The truth is that mostly, and this isn't true for all of us, but it's true for a lot of us, we hate ourselves. People say, I detest the face I see in the mirror. I ruminate over how I could have done things differently. And no one can say anything as harmful to me as I say to myself. We are really, really hard on ourselves. You know that? So Dr. Brene Brown really nailed it when she said, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed, and therefore we are unworthy of love and belonging. Unworthy of love and belonging. So what do we do about it, guys? What do we do about it? That's the key. So the first thing we can do is we can get informed about our ADHD, which is one of the things you're doing right now. So congratulations. I'm giving you a little applause. You are ahead of the game. There are other places to find out on the Adhd magazine that you can read the magazine. There are forums on the Adhd magazine site. There are blogs that you can read. There's all kinds of support for ADHD folks out there. And I'm thrilled that people are willing and able to express their frustration and express their discontent and their shame about who they're being, because it's a safe place to be who we are among others like us. Other places are going to conferences. The conference on ADHD is happening. That one's, I didn't mean to promote them actually, but it's coming up in November of next year, of this year, excuse me. Driven to Distraction, books like that that talk about ADHD so that you can understand your particular brand of ADHD. Even the ADHD Women's Palooza, which is one thing that I sponsor, is a place to get more information. This webinar is an important place to find out what's going on with your ADHD, and then beginning to know exactly your fingerprint or your thumbprint on it. Because let's face it, there are more than 7,000 different varieties of ADHD out there. If you just match all of the permutations and combinations of all the descriptors there are in the DSM-5. And then that doesn't even include things like where you live and your culture and your background and your gender and all those other things. So there are so many different unique ways your ADHD manifests that's what you need to do, is to find out exactly how that is. So what is your ADHD? How do I react under stress, for instance? Do I react, oh, no problem? Or is that something that's just incredibly difficult for me? Are decisions easy or difficult for me to make? Lots of times decision-making is difficult for ADHD folks. Do I usually say yes to others to the point of overwhelm? Are we trying to please others so much that we say yes? Or is that we're so interested in everything that we continue to say yes, and then suddenly everything kind of falls apart? So know that about yourself. Am I usually early? Am I late? Or am I on time? And some people will probably be listening and saying, early? I've never heard of early before. On time? That's an unusual occurrence for me. Let's face it, most of us run late, but that's an important thing to know about your ADHD. So how it manifests for you is important information for you to know. And you can say, oh, yeah, well, if I know that, duh, of course I know that. But the combination of all those things together can help you understand your ADHD and therefore be able to cope with it a little bit better and therefore avoid this shame spiral, if you will. Do I have piles of stuff, or am I obsessed with neatness? Some of you may say, are you kidding? ADHD folks are obsessed with neatness? Exactly. Some of them are, because they want control in that particular area of their life. And there are other areas of their life, they may never be on time. They have other ADHD issues. But that's what I'm saying, is that all of us manifest this very differently. And therefore, it's really important to know your particular brand of ADHD and how it plays out in your life. Like, do I talk a lot, or do I shut down? Some people just completely refuse to even participate. Some people just get in there. And then what happens when someone asks me something when I'm not expecting it? Do I have the deer in the headlights kind of thing? Or am I able to go ahead and go forward with that? There are many, many more questions. I could fill up this whole webinar with questions that we can ask ourselves about our ADHD, but those are questions that you can write down. In fact, I would invite you to write down, how does my ADHD manifest? Well, I'm never late. I'm always late. I could never get there. I got fired 3 or 4 times, all that kind of stuff. Those are important clues. It's not indictment. Those are clues that you help put this together for you. So then you start on your unique ADHD journey. So some of us need timers everywhere so that we know exactly, that we're getting out of the house on time. And some of us aren't even able to do it even with lots of timers. Some people, may be able to, do I make a decision? Do I make a decision yes? Do I make a decision no? Some people have really a lot of trouble making decisions. Some of you may have already gone through these things. Maybe you need someone to talk to. Maybe you need a therapist, or maybe you need to be involved in CBT, or you need to work with a coach. We are at all different places on this ADHD continuum of I want to say treatment, but it's not all treatment. It's all about knowing who you are and how you cope with things. I realized the other day that one of the ways that I cope is I use labels everywhere, and I have a labeling machine. And I mean, even this computer that I'm talking on right now has phone numbers on it and pins, and upstairs is my bank account number, and I have labels everywhere and everything. So starting your journey will allow you to compensate. Oh, I hate that word. That will allow you to deal with, that's a better word for me, to deal with your own ADHD in your own unique way. And I just want to make sure you understand that this is not about fixing your ADHD. It's not about towing that, quote, normal line wherever that normal line is. It's not about getting your shame down to a level of, oh, I can stand it now because I'm being like the rest of the world. It's not about fixing it. It's about linking arms with it, holding it close and saying, you know what? I can be friends with this instead of fighting it constantly. And many, many, many of us do. I certainly used to. Number 2, let in the light a little bit. Know what's going on out there so that you can reach out for help that you really need. Sometimes that means reaching for friends. Sometimes it means reaching for a professional. Sometimes it just means reaching out to the people who know you best in your family. And I know that some of you are saying, yeah, well, I tried that. Didn't work, because those people were the ones who judged me the most harshly. And you're right. And if that's the case, find yourself some other people who get it. ADHD support groups are amazing. You can find them on meetup.com. There may not be one in your area. You can find them online. You can find them at Adhd Magazine. You can find lots of other people who know what you're going through. I love having an in-person group because you can look into someone's eyes and they know that they really, really get it. And that in itself, being able to, I just talked to a client yesterday and we had to cut our session short, and she was talking. And I said, I need to cut our session short and we're going to make up the time later. And she said, oh, that's all right. I feel so much better now. It's just kind of letting the steam out of the shame and the feeling of I'm doing it wrong having just even sharing it with someone else and without judgment, let me make sure that you know that, without judgment, even that can help quell all of this whole shame piece of this. Next thing I'm going to talk about is your own self-talk. We are so much nastier to ourselves than anybody else out there. And maybe some of those words to ourselves came from outside, but my guess is that for you, as it did for me, they get twisted into something far more dangerous and far more self-loathing than what was originally intended. So what do we got here? We've got, you're an idiot, that we say to ourselves. What, are you kidding me? You're an idiot. Why did you do that? How stupid was that? You know better. You're never going to get this done. What is wrong with you, Linda? I knew you were going to screw this up again. We talk to ourselves far more harshly than anyone else out there in the real world. And yet we sometimes hear those words from other people and we interpret them as these exact phrases. So when somebody else notices our failings, we get to be right. You see, I am a screw up. You see, that's validating it. So you see, I am an idiot. I was trying so hard to get it right. So here's this younger woman talking to an older woman about, here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. And this woman is so, you can just see from her face, she's just like, I'm trying to endure this, but this young person is trying to tell me what to do, as opposed to reframing it and being open to learning. Here, the younger woman is actually explaining, and she may have been doing that to begin with in our previous slide, but it's how we take it in and talk to ourselves about it. So this self-talk can be, okay, I have trouble with this part, and I appreciate the help that she's offering. It has nothing to do with age either. Believe me, I could have reversed the roles here, and it could have been the younger woman was having issues and was angry at the other woman trying to help. Know your triggers. There are lots of triggers, and this woman is clearly angry because you're late. What are you doing? It's 10:30. You're supposed to be here at 9, blah, 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 all that kind of good stuff. So my encouragement to you is to take responsibility instead of blame. Blame and shame go hand in hand. So I've broken this out into two separate categories here. So let's pretend that you are running late. The responsibility piece would be that you would say to your boss, for instance, I understand that you're real angry that I'm late today. The blame part would be, it's all my fault. Or the other extreme of that, which is what blame is usually about, is it wasn't my fault. I had, every excuse in the world. So the responsibility piece is, I know how important this is to the company. Maybe it's a project that you're working on. And the blame part is, I didn't mean to, don't blame me. It's not me. The responsibility part is, I'm sorry, and I take responsibility for my part in this. And I want to dance on that my part for just a moment, because it tends to be that we take responsibility for everything in the world. If it rains, we say, I'm so sorry it rained. I know that's an extreme example, but we tend to take on so much of that. It falls into the blame. So the blame side of this, I'm so sorry for everything. Everything that's ever gone wrong in your life or mine or anybody else's is all my fault, and I'm so sorry for that. And it's unrealistic, as you know, but we tend to take it on anyway. And then the last piece of the responsibility is, what can I do right now to help right now? And then the other person says, you're right, I deserve to be fired, or I'll just quit. I know I'm worthless. So you understand the difference here between responsibility and blame. The blame game is easy to step into because we've been doing it to ourselves almost our whole lives. The responsibility piece is more difficult because we actually do have to step up and say, yeah, I did this. And here's how I'm going to change it. Or what is it that you need from me now? I wrote a little dialogue here, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it to you. It kind of goes right along with this. So some of the words will be in there. I understand that you're late. You're angry that I'm late today. And the boss or whomever says, you're darn right I'm angry. We only have 10 minutes before we meet with that new client. I got it, I say. And I apologize for my delay. What can I do to make things run more smoothly today? And the boss says, well, you can get to the appointment on time for one thing. And this person, me in this case, the employee or the person trying to please the boss, I understand, but what can I do to help right now? Well, you can get those files from my office while I set up the conference room. Great, I'll do that. Is there anything else? Yeah, try not to be late about it. Got it. I'll do it. Now notice how this manager or the boss tried to hook me at every turn, and how I could easily have gone into my petulant little, fine, just be mad about it. Rah, 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 rah. Then I can be mad at the boss. I can be mad at the manager or whomever it is. But what the important piece of that little dialogue is that you managed to stay neutral. You accepted responsibility for what you did, and you managed to keep things from escalating into an argument, or heck, that could have been this just one dialogue could have gotten you fired if you'd reacted differently. Okay. Responsibility is a skill that you can actually learn. That conversation that I just wrote down and read to you, the better conversation, the non-inflammatory conversation, is something that you can learn. But a lot of us feel like if we take responsibility, we're taking responsibility for everything, which ends up being blame. So our reaction to blame is to, oh my gosh, there I go again. And responsibility is saying, yeah, you know what? I screwed up. I screwed up this one thing. I didn't screw up the whole company. I didn't screw up my whole life. I screwed up one thing, and I'm going to take responsibility for that and do what I can to repair the damage, to fix it, to change it next time in whatever comes up in the conversation. So the last thing is probably the most difficult for us. And it sounds like, this is just the hokey stuff. Yeah, I'll forgive myself. But the truth is that we deserve forgiveness more than anyone else in the world out there, anyone else in our lives. I'm getting a little choked up again because forgiveness is really important for people, especially people like us, because we are so hard on ourselves. And no one would talk as roughly as we do to ourselves. But I want you to remember this phrase. If you could do, well, let's just make it I. If I could have done better, I would have done better. If I could have done better, I would have done better. We don't do these things on purpose. We don't maliciously set out to just screw up everything in our lives or in other people's lives. So remember this phrase, because given what you knew in the time, given what your state of mind was, given how, everything was going for you, given what the temperature was in the room, any of those variables, given what was going on for you in that moment, you did the best you could. We all do. And the truth is that nobody does anything wrong given their view of the world. We generally don't set out to cause problems for ourselves or for others. But if I could have done better, I would have done better. Hang on to that phrase. So I invite you to go from this conversation in your head. I'm not good enough. I've never been good enough. What's the difference? Nothing is ever good enough that I do, so I might as well give up. That's that fatalism. That's that shame of hiding under my desk. It's just protect me because I can't stand the slings and arrows of living in this life. And I invite you to go to this. I am good enough. Just the way I am, I'm adding those words, they're not on the screen. I'm good enough in this moment without changing anything, without doing any coaching, without doing any therapy, without apologizing to anyone, without doing I'm good enough right this moment as I am. Oh, that's hard to take, huh? Really, I can hear you arguing with me. And I have enough. I'm not there. I'm not in this place of scarcity. I have enough. I have exactly what I need to do what I need to do in terms of tools and all those kinds of things. And I've already done enough. A woman talked to me this morning. She said her sister-in-law constantly is doing things for other people. She just does things constantly. Why? Because she feels inadequate. She feels like that's the only way that she can actually be in the world, is to do things for other people. Why? Because then they will appreciate her. And likely, I'm making this up, but likely they won't notice her shortcomings if she's always the person doing nice things for other people. And more importantly, I forgive myself. I forgive you, Linda. I forgive you for blurting out the answer when someone else was trying to answer. I forgive you for spilling the red wine on your white carpet. I took responsibility for that, and I took care of the cleaning. I forgive myself for the missteps that I have done, whether they're attributable to ADHD or not, because we're not just our ADHD, for heaven's sake. We're everything. We're the culmination of everything that we've ever been from when we were tiny babies all the way to however old we are right now, whether you're in your 20s or whether you're in your 90s, for heaven's sake. We're all that culmination. And then the last piece in parentheses, I even love myself. And I put question marks after that because a lot of us don't love ourselves very much. but I'm telling you that it can be done because I learned to turn those tables. And I used to be right in there with the previous slide of, no way am I good enough. There's nothing that I can do to make this better. And I'm the slug of the universe kind of thing. So I have this last thing to share with you very quickly here. This is from my husband. He was killing time waiting for a pizza yesterday at the grocery store. And he brought me home 2 cards because the cards happened to be right next to the pizza station. And he goes, here, I brought you these. And this was a card and it said Life Trophy. It says the golden unicorn on it. If you can't read it, if you're on your phone or something, you can't read that. And it's actually an actual piece of plastic that's painted to look like it's gold. And on the inside, it said, oops, let me get over here and go to the next thing. I printed it out so you can read some of it. It says, you are hereby awarded the golden unicorn. And some of the words, which are hard to read, I printed, in a world full of boring, you're a magically rare breed. So hold your head high. Wait, what's that going by in a spectacular splash of awesome? Oh, yeah, it's you. Oh, yeah, it's you. You don't ever have to be ashamed of who you are, ADHD or not. And remember that you don't have to be perfect to be amazing. And I'm here to tell you, even if no one's told you lately or ever, you are truly amazing. So now let's answer questions, shall we? All these people saying, yeah, that's not it. That's not it.
Thank you, Linda. So listeners, please post your questions for Linda. And also you might want to post how her presentation touched you personally, what your own reaction, what your own manifestations of ADHD shame are. It might be interesting to see some of those posts.
Absolutely.
So, Linda, there are a number of interesting questions here about how to relate to others around you, spouse, family, who continue to essentially put you down or not understand, and don't and are not sympathetic. So here's from Jill: how do I handle a husband who's more critical of my ADHD than I am? But there are a number of questions along those lines. What are your thoughts on relationships with people around you, and who may be very critical of you?
And thank you for the question, whoever, if several of you asked that question, because it's a question that comes up over and over and over again. Because let's face it, we aren't just hard on ourselves; it's those people that are hard, those people out there who are hard on us as well. And let me just tell you that the way to not handle this is to put up this incredible protective shell and say, okay, I'm just going to let all that stuff. I'm not even going to think about this. I'm going to ignore it, because you have to get along with your family, right? It's not like somebody that you can just say, well, I've decided not to be friends with you anymore. These people live with you. So there are a couple of things that come to mind. One of them is, first of all, my husband did not understand my ADHD either. As a matter of fact, when I first found out about it, he did this kind of thing. See, it's your fault because blah, blah, blah. And that's that old thing about one finger pointing out and 3 fingers pointing back. And I got to tell you that I kind of cut that and nipped that in the bud, because it was like, no, you don't get to talk to me about that stuff because you're not perfect either. And the truth is that I'm just finding out about my ADHD. So first thing is you need to know your ADHD really well. And I'm assuming because you're here on the Adhd webinars, you're smarter than the average bear about ADHD. I'm thrilled that you are in this wonderful learning context, if you will. But the second thing is that make sure that they know about ADHD. And as a minute that those words come out of my mouth, I hear people saying, yeah, but he doesn't want to know, or she doesn't want to know about ADHD. She thinks it's just another excuse. Back to those excuses again, right? So there are a couple of things. Number one is that, I have so many things to say. They're all trying to come out of my mouth at the same time. That's ADD for you, right? So what I think helps is to make sure that, to the best of your ability, that your loved ones know about ADHD and how it manifests. And that does not mean taking a sledgehammer and nailing them over the head with it. But because I've talked to people who are just diagnosed and they're so excited to talk about their ADHD. It's like, that's my ADHD and that's why I leave the cabinet doors open and that's why you hit your head on them and blah, blah, blah. You can't force stuff down people's throats that they don't want to hear. But the conversation can be, here's what I've noticed about our relationship. I've noticed that you blame my ADHD for a lot of things, and I get that because, yeah, my ADHD is there. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to work together on this so that we can work out a way that we can live in our space together so that it works well. Well, if you would just clean up the kitchen, that would help. I got it. So did you hear how I did not argue and shut down? But instead, I said, I got it. I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing what you say. So what you're saying is that you don't like the kitchen cleaned up. Of course I don't like the kitchen cleaned up. I don't like the kitchen to be messy. Are you kidding me? I mean, look at the rest of the house, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just talking about housekeeping now. That's easy to do. I guess rather than go on and on with this, the trick to this is to have calm conversations and to not defend and not explain away your ADHD, but say, this is what works for me. Would you be willing to help with this particular thing? What will help me, for instance, in the dish kind of thing? What would help me is if you would put your dishes in the dishwasher and I'd be glad to do this. Or would you be willing to switch jobs with me? Would you be willing to do the dishes in the sink and I'd be willing to put all this other stuff away? It's a way of talking to each other and having some kind of compromise because you can work this out. And I know way too many people who have gotten divorced over simple things because they blame it on the ADHD, but it can be worked out with conversation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job of answering this question because there's so much to it.
No, it's a tough
Talk
question,
to Melissa
right?
Orloff.
Yeah. Well, there's also the counter to this, which is quite lovely. There are a number of people listening in who posted that they are a non-ADHD person and they're listening to try to learn how to better support an ADHD family member. It could be some of these are parents, some of them are married to someone. Yeah. So they're sort of saying, what is the best thing I can do to support and to stop the negative self-talk that I hear in my child or my spouse?
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's the flip side of this, right? So,
right.
So first of all, non-ADHD folks out there do want to understand. So that's all of our ADHD folks who are on the webinar today. Thank you to them. Let's send them a big salute because they really do want to help. They do want to understand this. But unfortunately, ADHD folks like us can be trying, to say the very least. We say we're going to do something and we don't do it. We try to go down this road and then it screws up. We are interested and suddenly we lose interest. So we're not the easiest people in the world to be around, but there are ways into that conversation. So for instance, let's talk about a non-ADHD spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend, and the person that you're with is, let's just say there's messy stuff all over the place. I'm just going to keep this domestic instead of out in the big wide world. What I'd really like from you is this. But well, let me back up. What typically happens is people are nice, right? Could you pick up your socks? I mean, because we got company coming, blah, blah, blah. So you're nice. And then after that, since that doesn't work, the socks are still on the floor, or maybe another pair of socks are on the floor. The first ones got picked up. I don't really think that's important to me. It's not important. It's just socks, right? Then you kind of escalate a little bit and it's more, look, we got company coming. We can't have socks laying there on the living room floor. Well, okay, fine, but it becomes an argument. And then what happens often is that we get into this very uncomfortable place of the non-ADHD spouse and parents are more likely to be okay with this because they are parents. But we get into a parent-child dynamic with couples so that the non-ADHD partner is picking up the slack for the ADHD folks. And the ADHD folks can do a couple of things with that. They can say, fine, I'm sliding through, baby. I'm fine. No responsibility. I'm good. I'm sorry to say this, but some of us play stupid. Some of us just say, okay, fine, I don't want to do it. I'll just let them do it. Even if it causes tension in the family, I'm fine with that. ADHD folks who are like us, who are on this webinar, who are trying to do things a little different, more productively, if you will. The spouse can talk to the ADHD partner and talk about, okay, look, I don't like what's happened to us, and I think we need to reset a little bit. So what is it that will work best for you? It can be a conversation. It doesn't need to be. I don't mean to give you advice. It doesn't need to be anything. But I invite you to consider a conversation. And the conversation is not about blame. It's not about if you would have done this and if you would take care of that, I would be happy. The conversation is more about what is it that we can do to work together? Here are the list of things that we need to accomplish in the household. I'll stick with the household. And tell me which of those things you can handle and which of them you can't handle. Now, what happens with that often is that the agreement is reached, the agreement is struck, and then it doesn't happen. The ADHD person forgets. The ADHD person doesn't have time. They're involved. They're on the internet. They're listening to this webinar, whatever. And then you need to come back and revisit it. And it's not with this kind of fingers pointing. It's more about saying, okay, that didn't work. What is it that made this breakdown? So looking at the breakdown is the important part of this. And that's true with kiddos too. If you're a parent dealing with a child who has, ADHD issues, is like, oh, how do I do this effectively? It's enlisting them. I talked to a person on a webinar last night who had a daughter who was 15 and she was using a study guide and it had ads on it. And he thought they might be distracting. He said, I'll just pay to get those ads off. She goes, no, they're not bothering me. He said, I got it. So that's wonderful. And so what I'm expecting is that you're going to get an A on this test then. So if that's not bothering you, you should get an A. And all of a sudden her eyes got really big. She's like, ooh, I got to get an A now. A few weeks later, he looked back and she was using the same app and she had covered up the ads with a Post-it note. And he said, well, I thought you didn't mind having the ads. Well, suddenly the work got harder. So she learned to do that herself. And her father let her learn that lesson. And it's really hard to let ADHD folks do this because sometimes it takes a long time for us to learn those lessons. So trying to stay out of it and also working with them is the important piece. And that's not about being said, oh, poor you. That's not it. It's about how can we work together to make this work for everyone. I hope that makes sense. I kind of went on and on about that because it's really important.
Super helpful. So that was really interesting, Linda. Here's another question from someone who said that she is recently diagnosed. I think she said she was in her 60s. And while meds have helped, she realizes there's a lot of skills and changes she needs to make in the way she functions. And she wanted to know what your thoughts were on cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy as well.
Well, CBT and DL, I think they're both fine. Because what they both do is take the judgment out of the actions. That's the bottom line of both of them. DBT, I've worked with both of them. I've worked with DBT and CBT. I think that they are highly advised for ADHD folks. I was invited to do DBT. DBT for me was a year-long program, and I just couldn't commit that time. CBT can be done weekly, but it's really about taking the shame and the blame out of the things that you're doing and then making choices. So again, kind of like what I was talking about with kids and spouses and all that kind of stuff, it's about approaching this in a different way. So that you can actually start at ground zero or neutral, not ground zero, good God. But you can start at neutral instead of already operating at a deficit. And I'm not just talking about what other people think of us. I'm talking about what you think of yourself. What we think of ourselves can really push us down to, I can't do this. And and especially after 60 years, because I'm in my 60s as well. After 60 years, we've had a lot of chances to do this. I'm going to say wrong, and I'm putting parentheses, question marks, quotation marks around that, because it hasn't been wrong for us. It's been the only way we've known how to do it. If we're going to make dramatic changes, know that they're going to happen slowly. Know that you're going to have some awakenings. Know that you're going to have some aha moments, and know that you're going to stumble and fall just as you have in the past until it becomes part of you. It took me years to be able to look myself in the mirror and say, one of the things that I learned from one of my many, many classes and many, many programs was at the end of the day to say, I appreciate you for this. I appreciate you for this in a mirror. And at the very end of it say, and remember, Linda, I really love you. I could not meet my eyes. I would sob because I did not love that person. So it takes time to do this. And in your 60s, you got plenty of time, baby. Plenty of time. I have plenty of time, too. And it's a process. It's a process, right? You don't just get it. and it's better, which is what some of our spouses would like us to do, or some of our loved ones or parents would like us to do. Take that pill, you're fixed. That's not what ADHD is. We're far more complicated, far more interesting than that.
Okay. ADHD in the workplace. So there are a number of people listening in who are asking questions about how to overcome problems in the workplace. Sometimes they've been fired. Sometimes they feel that they're hiding mistakes, and if people really knew how many they made, they would be fired. Just in general, do you have any advice about sort of, I know, a large topic, but about adults in the workplace and the shame that they may feel about their how they're functioning?
Yeah, thank you for that question, all of you who wrote in about that question, because it really is a very difficult situation. Being fired, I was fired one time, and it was specifically because of my ADHD. I didn't know it at the time, but it absolutely was because I wasn't paying enough attention, if you will, to a particular client, and they asked that I be removed, and I got fired. I was completely blindsided by the whole thing. I'd never been fired. I'm a high achiever. I don't do that kind of stuff, right? So I don't even admit that to very many people, and now, oh my God, now it's recorded. Everyone's going to know. Anyway, and in the workplace, though, there's two things. Number one, hiding is actually endemic in the ADHD community. And I have a friend who's a nurse, and she was getting farther and farther and farther behind on her reports. And to the point that, and I know this is not going to be helpful, but I just want to mention it, she finally had to quit, because she was so far behind on those reports that if they found out, and they did, of course, when she quit, they were going to fire her anyway. So she preemptively quit. So let me just tell you that there's nothing new about this for ADHD folks. Unfortunately for us, ADHD is still kind of in the closet in the workplace, in most places. There are some places that you can be out about your ADHD. But the truth is that I've heard Sari Solden talk about the fact that she'd come in on weekends and try to catch up with all of her paperwork because everybody else was off for the weekend, and someone showed up at her door one day and said, "Why are you still here?" "Oh, I'm just working on extra stuff." She wasn't. She was just trying to catch up, which is true for a lot of us. The pace of, especially paperwork, especially reports, that kind of stuff, is difficult to keep up with. So what do we do about it? Well, first of all, if you're in an ADHD forgiving and friendly environment, you can ask for help. And that may or may not be possible for you. For most of it, it's not. People if you've already gotten fired because of those ADHD issues, there's that black mark on your record. It makes it difficult to go in and find another job. But let me just say, I promise I'm getting on to what you do now. But if you've been fired for ADHD issues, that's really a gift to you. And you're going, yeah, right, as you roll your eyes at me. I need a job. I can't get fired. Learn what happened in your other job and look for a job that is more friendly to your ADHD. Not a list that somebody wrote on some website that said, these are the ADHD friendly jobs. Not that. What works for you? What do you need in your next job so that you can actually succeed instead of hiding? Because we hide so much on the job, in relationship, with friends, and it's time to stop doing that. It's time to come out of that ADHD closet and be who we are, unless you are not in an ADHD-friendly environment at work. So if you are making mistakes, if you are behind, I have to say this, that the best way is to come clean with this, especially if you're working for a boss who is in the tiniest bit sympathetic to you and appreciate having you around as an employee. Go there. And I worked with a woman who worked for a major corporation here in the United States, and she actually we ended up setting up a situation where her boss really wanted to keep her. We ended up with a situation where we planned out the week and how much time she had to get things done. And she went into her boss every day and said, "This is what I'm working on. Is there anything else that's more important than this? Or this is what I'm catching up on. May I catch up on this report one at a time for the next 3 weeks," or whatever it is. So doing some negotiations with if you've been in this job for a long time, you do not have to tell them you have ADHD. You do have to come clean and say, this is what's happening. And I know that I want to do better for you. So make this about them, not about you. "Oh, poor me. I'm a bad employee. I'm so sorry." Blah. It's not, of course you're sorry, but you take, again, back to the responsibility versus blame. Take responsibility for your part in this. What I know to be true is that I have been falling behind on some of my reports. And what I'd like to do is catch up, because I know it's important to this company to make sure that we have those reports in on time. Make this a benefit for your boss or for your coworker or whomever you're talking about. Make sure that you are making it their win, not just yours. And sure, they may say, yeah, what do you mean you're 3 months behind in your reports? Blah, 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 blah. I got it. And I understand that that's very upsetting because we need those reports out. And what I'm here to tell you is that I'm willing to work every Saturday for the next month to catch up those reports if that'll work for you. Is there anything that you might suggest? What can I do to change this? Ask what they want. Don't try and second guess them. You'll never know what they want. They might want what you think, but probably not. All right, that was a huge topic.
Okay,
I would love to talk about that for another hour and a half.
Well, an interesting question here from Erin. She says, I view of this concept of, sort of fessing up. She says, I work in a field where it would be catastrophic if it were known that I was ADHD. I'm looking for ways to minimize my screw-ups and covering up mistakes and redo my undetected work. Suggestions for navigating this minefield. I'm wondering whether your answer might be that she's in the wrong field. I don't know.
Well, yes and no. I mean, not all fields are ADHD friendly, but we may love doing them, or we may be bound in by a salary.
Right.
Let's face it here. We've got to make the money we got to make because the mortgage or the rent or the whatever is going on. So it is a minefield, and I'm glad that you recognize that. But there can be a place without mentioning the term ADHD, and I hate to do that. I hate to hide it like that because it's as if it's shameful that we have ADHD. There's a cause for you, right? And Adhd Magazine's doing a great job of normalizing that. So congratulations to Adhd Magazine. But it is a minefield. So you find, in my opinion, you can look for the people that are most willing to help, most sympathetic, and notice that you can say without mentioning ADHD, what I'm having a little bit of trouble with is this. Would you be willing to blah, 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 fill in the blank? Would you be willing to read over my reports before I send them in just to make sure that I've got everything okay? And if that person is willing, great. If that person says, I already got too much work, I got my own reports to do, then you find somebody else or you find somebody outside the company. Because we need support from every angle. And if you're behind already, that means that you are trying to just stay even with today's work and all this backlog is back here and you're barely getting through the day with this. Does this sound familiar? Because it sounds like it's a demanding job. So there are ways to do this. And at some point, you got to come clean. You can't just continue to, I'll catch up. And then you get farther and farther behind, in part just because of the anxiety about it, frankly. Mm-hmm. So there are ways to do this that are not going to get you fired. And I know your anxiety level is like right up here. So allow yourself to say, okay, this is what's true. And then be realistic about it. Actually sit down and say, okay, well, I know this needs to be done. And I know this is hard for us ADHD folks, but we need to set priorities. If you have a therapist, if you have a coach, if you have someone else that you can talk to outside the company, maybe they can help with that. But believe me, I know there's a minefield out there. And what I'm positive is that you can navigate it. And Susan may be right. Maybe it isn't the right job for you. So you may want to look at that as well. That's a bigger question, that's for sure. But right. I empathize with how difficult that is.
That's very tough. So here's one for you. Procrastination. This Nancy says procrastination is the thing I just can't forgive myself, not just at work, but in my personal life. And Seth says, what is it about procrastination? Okay, let's talk about it later. So we're on a little ADHD.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.
I love it. Yeah, let's talk about it later. Since we only have 2 minutes, yeah. 2 minutes to fit everything about procrastination in here. So shame about procrastination is endemic because we get nailed for it, right? People notice, and then that's when we start hiding. And that's kind of what I was talking about with the question about, how do I navigate the minefield here? So first of all, coming clean is important, especially in that case. But procrastination, it's probably understanding why you're procrastinating and what you're procrastinating with. Do you know what I mean? Like, is it online games? Is it any of those kind of things? Because productivity for us is inconsistent, to say the least. We get interested in something. It's like, bam, we can go to town on it. We can hyper-focus for hours and hours and hours. Why? What's going on with this procrastination? Is you just don't want to do it? Is it something that you're not good at? Is it something that you want someone else to take over? Did someone assign it to you? So kind of sussing that out a little bit and pulling it apart. Why am I procrastinating? And sometimes we just may procrastinate because we're in the habit of procrastinating. So you need to be honest with yourself about that. Is that just one of those things, as I do? Oh, that's due in about 3 weeks. I'll do it the day before. I know I can. That's not now. It's the old now, not now thing with Dr. Hallowell, right? So being honest with yourself about procrastination and then setting up a situation so that you can succeed. And it's going to have to be in small increments, you guys. It can't be, okay, I'm going to stop procrastinating on everything. Take a very careful, candid look at the things that you procrastinate on the most. Prioritization, another one of our favorites, right? Procrastinate the most on. What about it? Why am I not doing this? Do you not have time? Is it not really interesting? Maybe it's something you don't even need to do at this point. Somebody else thinks you need to, but you don't now, unless it's a boss, of course. So that's a very, very brief answer to a much, much deeper topic. But believe me, I empathize with that.
I know.
So you probably have webinars about that, right?
Well, we have some great articles on procrastination. I mean, so we're definitely out of time, but you're absolutely right. We could spend an hour on that. So, Linda, thank you so much. I think this has just been so inspirational for so many people just to be understood and to have someone, talk about the realities of what it feels like to live with this kind of shame. Listeners, next Thursday, we have Getting Things Done, ADHD-friendly productivity strategies for adults with ADHD with Linda Walker. So Thursday, April 25th at 1 p.m. And then the week after, on May 1st, we have our first ever webinar on just boys with ADHD. So please check back, and we hope to see you then. And Linda, our thanks. And everyone, you will find the replay of this webinar on our site. It may not be until tomorrow. We've been trying to get them up shortly, but it may be for an hour. It may not be till tomorrow, but you will find it, and you will be able to share it with friends, relatives, and others. So, Linda, thanks again, and thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.